Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Safe Conversations. We're thrilled that you are just tuning in, checking this out, and really hopeful that this has been helpful to you. And if you have found this to be helpful, please get the word out. Share this with friends and family, and because I really do believe the things and topics we're talking about are very important and very useful. Paul, how are you doing?
Are we going to talk about the Cardinals today?
I would love to talk about the Cardinals, but we don't have enough time.
It would be a safe conversation.
It would be it would be safe. Maybe not. Some
Maybe.
Royals fans might not really care about this conversation, but So we're talking, Paul, the last couple episodes about relationships, friendships, and I wanted us to kind of delve into a little bit, just kind of talk a little bit about Jesus, which is always a good conversation.
Yes.
And the disciples and how these guys interacted with Jesus. They're always seem to be always making mistakes,
Yes.
never able to quite get it, yet they feel safe with Jesus?
Yeah, I like that phrase, accepted. I had an experience with a curiosity about the Gospels in reference to what you're saying. And so I just did a sit-down one-time read. And, of course, the first three Gospels, quite repetitive, but I made it through them to John. And because of my own background with a fear of rejection, abandonment is sort of part of my autobiography. I was looking for, did the disciples experience that with Jesus? Because you're right, I could find their mistakes real quick. And I never found them reacting in a horrible, shameful, terrorized way because they were kicked out of the Jesus Disciple Club.
Yeah.
I never found it.
Fascinating that he chooses such what we would refer to as ordinary.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the world, ordinary men, and not to get off topic, but I think it was, in that day and age, for a female to go leave everything and follow just wasn't the culture.
Yeah.
So. But still, these guys go and follow Jesus, and like you said, they never feel like they're an outsider.
No, when I think of a verse about Jesus, they observe him in John chapter 1, full of grace and truth.
Yeah.
It's as if he knows the truth about who they really are, and his grace allows plenty of room for them to grow. And I think if I am able to look at the disciples as students and him as a teacher through that lens, well, he's allowing that they don't get it. He's understanding first graders can't function like a fifth grader would be one of the thoughts.
And that allowed them the room to make mistakes and feel safe and to grow. And so, what would that look like? I mean, you're walking with Jesus. They spend all this time with him. What does it look like to be in that kind of a relationship?
With somebody else.
With somebody else that allows that in you. And even though you can tell they're further down the road than you are, but they're just allowing you to come along and learn. And what does that look like?
I don't have, this is a sad confession, I don't have a experience with someone 10 years older than me or whatever a mentor would be for any long period of time. So I have to use my imagination. What I have are what you and I do, and I have a lot of peer stuff that goes on. Now, I have older men, a few years older, but not a lot of them, but it's more peer. Then I have a lot behind me. The commonality seems to be the desire to follow Jesus. My guess is that it would feel very strange to me to be accepted that well that I could be entrusted in this safety to kind of create, learn, grow, explore, sure that he's going to protect me. But that would be strange to me.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the disciples themselves had to kind of grow into that. I'm sure it was unusual for them as well.
Well, we kind of peek over into their lives when we see them talking about who's the greatest.
Yeah.
And it looks a little pompous, arrogant, like, would you let my son sit on each of your side? And I just think that it was a very vulnerable exposure, and they felt very comfortable with mom or someone else suggesting they should be the main one.
They did, and that story takes place toward the end. Jesus is trying to prepare them for the crucifixion, and that's where their mind was at.
Yes.
And but once again, totally feeling loved and accepted in that
it looks
group.
like what I would look for, and I know the Bible's not trying to be a clinical psychology text, but I look for those indicators of horrible embarrassment, shame, gosh, I'm a real knucklehead, even though Jesus could fully love them and they could still say that, but I don't see those reactions. Like, I like it when I think it's James and John are going to bring some fire down on a town. I mean, they're upset.
Yeah.
And they're going to like, well, we'll show them. And Jesus is going, I don't think we're going to do the fire thing, today.
Yeah. Yeah, he tells them interesting on that story because he says, it's not in a lot of the texts, but in that story, he actually says, in some, I forget exactly how he says it, but that's not the spirit we're working with here.
Yes.
You don't even realize the spirit that's controlling you when you're asking about that. But once again, if he says that to them, it's correction, but they don't feel shame. I mean, with Peter, how do you, 1 minute, you're like, Peter, on this rock, I'm going to build my church, the confession that you've made, this is incredible. You nailed it. Way to go. And then get behind me, Satan, is followed up with that. But again, I think if I had a mentor when you talk about experiences, I'm just talking about my experiences. If I had one of the individuals I looked up to said, get behind me, Satan, I'd go crawl in a corner and I'd be like, I'm done. I'll go do something else.
Well, and if one of the ones that were with me, often if I were to hear something like that, it would be a rejection of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think of, and we don't have a lot of scripture around this, but I wonder how he related to Judas along the way. We have these little episodes where Judas shows up, but you've got Judas, who is going to be a betrayer. I mean, they're all going to betray him, right? But in a more overt way, he's dipping in the bag, along the way. I mean, there's some pretty dark things about him. But we don't see Jesus reaming him. Now, I know when the Scripture's silent, it's silent, and we can't read into that. But there's a whole lot of interacting going on that we don't know about.
A whole lot. And I think maybe when we're talking about it, and I think it's beneficial to explore what that would look like, because it would help us today in our interaction. So what I mean by that, Paul, is you had maybe mentioned this to me privately, maybe it was in one of the podcasts here, but that when we interact with individuals, there's really levels of communication. Yeah. And they are at a different level of communication than most of us are at with people. Would you mind, let's just start unpacking a little bit the levels of communication, because in order to see the kind of the growth that the disciples saw, you're going to have to get to a certain level with another person. I
think that's a good point, that when we're observing them, we can't assume we are in that place always that they are. Yeah, there's a very common model out there that talks about levels of communication that's been in education and counseling for a while. And it would start off at the very least, the more shallow area. And shallow doesn't mean bad, but it's
Right.
what I do. When I leave here, I'll go by Quick Trip and grab something to drink, and I'll go, "How you doing?" I'm not
Yeah.
wanting a 30-minute conversation.
See, Quick Trip's family to me. See, I'm in a very different level of relationship.
Well, you
with
let me
Quick Trip.
know when we're at that level that
Okay.
you're at with Quick Trip. So
Yeah.
there's that. It's the more common greeting, "How you doing? What's going
Mhm.
on?" Below that is a sharing of ideas that can move a little bit more into opinions. So there's a little bit of disclosure of an opinion in that. So it might be something about politics. It might be something about, for us in Christian doctrine, or for me in the area of psychology.
Can I just stop there for a second and make sure that we go through all of these? But the first one is kind of, I've heard it called cliche. I don't know.
Cliche is good. Yeah.
You know, and when I think about your interaction at your illustration of Quick Trip, I'm thinking that's primarily what happens when the church gathers, meeting on a Sunday morning. The conversations are cliche. They're pretty, how you doing, fine, weather,
Right.
sports.
Yeah, we haven't set up a structure that's consistent where that's allowed. And I think one of the difficulties is, how do you do that with 100+ people, 1,000+
Right.
people? But
You have to get in smaller groups, don't they?
Yeah, there's needs to be some attempt at that, and it says a lot about us that we have to initiate the idea of small group because it's not naturally in our socialization process.
Not anymore.
No, not anymore. It's not.
So that you started talking about the second level,
Yeah.
where we can share ideas and opinions, and I don't know if this ties in or not, but I'm thinking, culturally speaking, the United States, we can't even share ideas and opinions anymore. The setting doesn't allow for it, because if my opinion differs from yours, then
Meaning the hostility?
the hostility, and then there seems to be a group peer pressure, I see, Paul, where that if you're aligned with a certain group, and you almost have to pull away from the other group. You can't, the group won't allow you to stay a part of their group if you're friends with. Do you follow what I'm saying?
No, I do.
And
I
so
do.
we don't even have a safe place to share ideas and opinions.
No, I think it's a point I haven't thought of. Yeah, I think that really does reflect the way I experience it. That
Yeah.
you've got to stay. For me, when I think of my experience with Christianity within my denominational sort of boundaries or guidelines, so I wasn't, as a Southern Baptist, I wasn't going to hang out with a Methodist, and that was just understood. I don't ever remember anybody telling me that. So even
Same.
in that sense,
Yeah.
not so much today, but at that time it was.
So let's say that somebody's, I would say, we are wired to be in community, and part of that wiring is God uses community to help us grow. It's just the way we're designed. We don't just
Yes.
grow. Like, I love to be alone and read. That's a certain, it helps
Yes.
learn, but there has to be interaction. So let's go beyond that. Let's say that somebody has some friends or in a group where they can share some ideas and opinions. What's the next level?
The next level is going to move into some honest, overt discussion about emotional content. So having an opinion could lay a foundation for the emotional content. Now, if it's a hostile environment, that's not always safe, even though I'm in very close relationships where people have anger and really need to. They need a place where that So they're not necessarily angry at me, but they're just working through anger.
Yeah.
But if you can step down to that next level, you're literally moving, if you're thinking about the brain, from more thinking, conceptual to emotional. And I just think from a guy's view, that raises red flags for guys.
I agree.
And I honestly, I may have said this last time, I don't think guys are less emotional. I think it's deformity. I think it's a different type of emotion. But I don't think when I look at Jesus that we're going to say, well, he's just cognitive or he's just emotional.
Right.
You know?
So more than likely, maybe this is a poor example because I'm looking through the life of Christ, and I know that he's going through, as he enters into the garden, he's in the struggle of obviously his life. And he brings three individuals that I would guess Peter, James, and John. I'm wondering if he doesn't feel safer around them. That
a good thought.
They've built this kind of, and he brought them there because he needs them. And he is very emotional, at least sharing. You know, he's just saying, please stay awake with me, watch. Yes. So when you say, I think that's an example where maybe the emotion was coming out with Jesus. But what does it look like to share emotion with somebody?
It would. You brought out, I don't know how many of the Safe Conversations ago, a list of emotional words. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a vocabulary, you can't talk about something. So you're aware in theology that it has vocabulary. I'm aware of in psychology there's vocabulary. And anytime you cross a field, some of the difficulty is not that we're not intelligent. It's like, how do I master get enough vocabulary to know what people are saying along the way? So a person has some individual work to do that could be benefited by somebody else when they're just trying to identify them. So in relationships with people, if I'm in a friendship and one of the challenges is they're stronger in the thinking component than the emotion, I just have them identify what emotion they're feeling at that moment that we're together. So it becomes a way in relationship to help them.
So would I be correct in assuming that that kind of level of communication and relationship, that's going to take time?
That's right. Yeah, I rarely meet someone for the first time to build a relationship, and you decide that there's going to be, a hangout time once a month or whatever, more of a mentoring, that we start there. No, that takes time. But when I intentionally mentor, I want to know what commitment level they're at in that time. I know this is another type of relationship,
right? But
I'm real interested in knowing how invested they are in the growth process.
Now, is there a level beyond
there is
that level?
Yeah, and we got pretty close to it when I was mentioning just the content of being able to discuss feelings. There is this very vulnerable transparency underneath that, where whether it's emotional or it's historical or it's painful or joyful, it's safe enough that the person doesn't carry a dialogue in their head saying, should I say this? That's how you know when you're closer to that. We carry on this little, got this little
That's
dialogue
good.
that we carry on that says, I can
that's
share
really
a little bit of opinion, but I don't know about this next level.
Now, I have to say, should I say this? I do think we have to be cautious that the individual who doesn't have a filter doesn't say, well, that's the level I'm at with everybody, because I just say what hits my brain. We're not talking about that. That's a different.
No, it would assume a certain amount of empathy
Yes.
that you'd have to have. And where people, there is a way to use those levels to know where or what type of communication to have with somebody. Like if all I have with the person, if all we had was cliche, I should not be shocked if I jump down to feelings and you're going like, like, well, what was that?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
If you did that to your quick trip clerk, they'd be stunned,
I
wouldn't
may
they?
try that. I'll report next time
Yeah,
how
let me tell-
that went.
Can we follow you with the camera? Because I want
Yes.
to see that.
Well, I have worked with a few people that really were working at a more depth communication, and they would get their feelings hurt. And I kept saying, are these people talking at a feeling level with you? Because if they're not, you're inviting them into something that they're not necessarily agreeing with at this point.
Well, I think maybe on this podcast we can get some of our guys that's helping us here maybe to write out those levels, and maybe when we're talking about them we can put those up so that that we make sure people see that. Yeah, so that people understand that, because I think, if you're seeking to develop a relationship with one or two people and you're like, I want this to be more than just weather or sports or politics or whatever, maybe this could be a kind of a gauge to say, where's this at?
One more
Absolutely.
thought. The emotional level and the deeper vulnerability, transparency levels are the levels that are required for deep change to occur.
Good. Glad you said that.
So if I need to be intentional about pursuing some that can dip there, because vulnerability and honesty about where I am is the prerequisite to make a move and a change.
Wow. Now, you just said a lot there that I want to make sure everybody catches, because you just said if you want to be intentional about growth, change, transformation, you got to look for that.
Seriously look for it.
Because I can see individuals right now going, well, I don't have that. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's because you're not looking for it. You're not intentional about seeking that.
Seeing the value. I don't think what I just said is common information out there.
I don't either. I think you're right.
Yeah,
Most people don't.
So you don't know what to pursue.
And this will help an individual grow deeper in their walk with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And it will help them become a more loving person. So that should be that should encourage all of us to seek this. And I would encourage people, as a pastor, I would say first thing I would do is begin to pray and ask God to bring people in my life that I could do that. But you also have to put yourself in certain situations, such as the groups. When there are opportunities to begin to meet, then you got to take advantage of those opportunities. So,
no, that's right. I think that's good advice.
Well, I think that's about our time for this one, and some good stuff. And look forward to seeing you all next time.